Okay, morning everybody. We are returning to Gemarah Sanhedrin, page 19a. Last week I was away, so there wasn't any shiur, so we are on page 109, I believe, in the Steinsaltz Gemarah. Let me try and share that screen with you now. Please let me know if you've got it.
Yep.
Good. Okay. So what we said last time was that a king does not give testimony and cannot be charged with an offense, cannot be brought to the Beis Din, to the Sanhedrin. And we asked a question. That's not true, is it? Because we know that Shlomo HaMelech judged. We have the famous story of the baby, which is known as the judgment of Solomon. So he was a king, so that can't be right. We also know from various places that David also judged. So what does it mean? So the Gemara said, well, what it means is, it means the kings of Israel, as opposed to the kings of Judah. Remember, at the end of the reign of King Solomon, the kingdom split into the northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Yehudah, and the northern kingdom of Israel was not particularly loyal to Hashem, at least according to Tanakh anyway, which is written from the perspective of Yehudah, not from the perspective of Israel. And they were led by the tribe of Ephraim. The southern kingdom of Yehudah was led by the tribe of Yehudah, and their kings, at least initially, were all from the Davidic dynasty. They were all from the family of King David. And it was the family of King David's kings who were allowed to judge and are therefore allowed to be judged. But the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel were not allowed to be judged. And that's where we left off last time. And we were about to find out why. Why is it that the kings of Israel cannot be judged and can therefore not be give testimony themselves, and the other kings can? So we are in the Gemara over here, Ela Malchei Yisrael, where my pointer is. So let's start from there. Ela Malchei Yisrael, my tama lo. The kings of Israel, what is the reason that they cannot judge? My tama, what is the reason lo, that they can't judge? And the answer that the Gemara gives is a very fascinating answer. Mishum ma'aseh shahaya. Because of a happening, an incident that occurred. Ma'aseh shahaya, an incident that occurred. Now, what was the incident? De'avdei de'yanai malka ketal nafsha. The servant of Yanai the king killed somebody. I'm going to stop there because it's very important that we know who these people are. Now, I'll just go on a little bit more and then stop. Amar lehu Shimon ben Shetach lechachamim. Shimon ben Shetach said to the sages, Tanu einechem bo unedunenu. You need to literally place your eyes upon him, meaning, well, we'll see who it means in a minute, and need to judge him. Now, let's stop there and look at who these people are. First of all, who was Yanai HaMelech? Who was Yanai HaMelech? Okay, well, if you want to have a look, see who he is, there on the screen now is a little partial family tree of the Hashmonaim. Story of the Hashmonaim is very familiar to you from Hanukkah. We're talking around about the 2nd century BCE, before the Common Era. So time of Hanukkah, time where the Greeks were in ascendancy. The Greeks were the masters of the land of Israel. And they tried to Hellenize everybody, tried to make everybody into Greeks, Greek culture. They tried to force Greek culture upon the population in Yehuda. And it didn't go down very well with some people. There were great fractures in the Jewish people at that time, though not surprisingly, not for the first time and not for the last time. There were those who were in favor of Hellenization, of modernization, of incorporating Greek culture into Jewish life. And there were those who were vehemently opposed to the Greek culture and wanted to keep Jewish practice pure and not take on the Greek practices, which included idol worship. And so there was this fracture in the Jewish people. Along came an edict that a statue of Zeus had to be placed into the temple, and that was a terrible thing that happened. There was a chap called Matityahu, Kohen Gadol, and he lived in a place called Modi'in, which is not far from modern Modi'in, and he was not having any of it and defied the Greeks, and that was the beginning of the Hashmonaic revolt. Matityahu had 5 sons. Who can tell me the 5 sons of Matityahu? Well, you've got 3 of them on the page. Shimon, Yehuda, Yochanan. Who are the other 2? I can't remember either. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The son of Shimon was also called Yochanan, known in English as John Hyrcanus I. And as you can see on the screen, he ruled. He was a king of the Hashmonaic king. After the revolt, the Hashmonaic had a dynasty which lasted 77 years. He was the first king, and he had a number of children. The first one that became king after him was Aristobulus, also known as Yehuda. And he only reigned for a year before he was done in. And he was married to Shlomtzion Hamalka. Shlomtzion Hamalka, we mentioned her a couple of weeks ago. She was the queen, married to Yehuda or Aristobulus. Now, Aristobulus died after a year on the throne, and he didn't have any children. And so therefore, what had to happen?
He had to marry, the brother had to marry her.
Correct. The brother had to marry her, levirate marriage, as Julia mouthed on mute there. Correct. And that brother was a chap called Alexander Jannius in the common parlance. Alexander Yannai. And he married Shlomtzion Hamalka, who was the queen. And he was a rather complex character, this Yannai. He was cruel, violent, and he was part of the Sadducee movement, the Saddukim. He was supported by the Tzedukim, who had a big battle with the Perushim, the Pharisees. Pharisees were the ancestors of rabbinic Judaism. So there was this terrible fracture in the Jewish people between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the problem was that Alexander Yanai, the king, was a supporter of and supported by the Sadducees. His queen, Shlomtzion Malka, was from a Pharisee family. She had a brother called Shimon ben Shetach. Now, you've now heard the two main protagonists, or antagonists, in fact, of our story. You now know who King Yanai was, and the other person, Shimon ben Shetach, happened to be his brother-in-law. Now, the background to all of this is that Shimon ben Shetach at one point had to run away, had to flee from before Yanai because he was busy killing Pharisees. He ran away. Eventually, Shlomtzion managed to persuade him to allow Shimon ben Shetach back. Shimon ben Shetach became the Nasi. He became the head of the Sanhedrin. And it is at this time when Shimon ben Shetach is the head of the Sanhedrin and Yanai is the king that this story in our Gemarah takes place. So it's a very messy business because you've got King Yanai, who is not a fan of Shimon ben Shetach, to say the least. He is a Sadducee supporter. You have his brother-in-law, who is now the head of the Sanhedrin, a Pharisee, not a fan of King Yanai. And there is a court case going on. You will say to me, well, what's it got to do with Yanai? It was his slave that killed the person. That's what we said, wasn't it? Let's just go back up the page. Avdei de Yanai Malka ketal nafsha. The slave of King Yanai killed a person. What's that got to do with Yanai?
Well, Yanai may have known about it.
He may well have known about it. What if he didn't know about it?
Doesn't a king know about everything that goes on in his court?
Okay, so he knows about it. So what?
Well, then he can't allow his slave just to go without punishment. In the
So you're saying Yanai should have punished his slave?
Definitely.
It's the property of the king.
Ah, he's the property of the king. Slaves are the property of the king. And what happens if, well, the slave is a property of his owner, not necessarily the king. This chap just happens to be a king. Yeah. Any person who owns a slave, it's as if he owns him. It's his property. What happens if somebody's property damages somebody else's property?
He's responsible.
He's responsible for it. So in today's parlance, if your car rolls down the hill without you in it and smashes into somebody else's car, you, as the owner of that car, are responsible for the damage done.
Well, you're negligent in not parking it properly.
Yeah, okay. Well,
unless somebody's stolen it, in which case you've got a third party who's interfered, and then your liability would be reduced. But if you're responsible for letting the car roll down the hill, then you're absolutely should be liable.
You are responsible for the actions. Okay, I'll give you a better example, one on which I'm on firmer ground. You are a GP, and you are a partner of a GP practice, and your employee, your nurse, who is employed by you, makes a mess of something, performs a negligent act which causes damage to somebody else, or a receptionist whom you employ gives a piece of information to somebody which is incorrect, which leads to damage to that person. They told them that their blood result was normal when it wasn't. And they went on blindly thinking that they weren't diabetic when they were, and then they got very ill and died. Who is responsible for that, Julia?
Well, my talk was never my favourite subject, I have to say. However, I do know there is such a thing as vicarious liability. And vicarious liability would mean that while somebody is working for you and working according to their employment contract, then you would be responsible.
Correct. Absolutely. You remember your tort law very well. This is something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis in my real job. And that is that a partner of the GP practice in that situation is vicariously responsible for the errors and omissions of his staff. Same in Jewish law. And does anybody know where in Jewish law we learn this from? Where do we learn the law of vicarious responsibility in Jewish law? David, can you help us?
Yeah, Parashat Mishpatim.
Very good. Yes, go on.
An ox scoring another ox.
Okay, very good. Let's go straight to it. Can you see the screen now? Or do I need to reshare? What can you see? Can you see some writing with blue on it? What can you see on the screen?
No, just the Gemarah page, Johnny.
Just the Gemarah. Okay, so that means I have to unshare and share again. Okay, hang on a minute. Let me share again. How about now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, as David mentioned, it's in Parashat Mishpatim. A habitually goring bull since yesterday and the day before. In other words, this is an ox which is not a one-off occurrence. This is an ox which has gored somebody before. V'hu'ad bivalav. V'hu'ad. He has been warned. The owner has been warned. In other words, he knows, he's on notice that this is a goring ox. V'lo yishmerenu, and he didn't look after it properly. V'hemit ish o isha, and the ox kills a person. Hashor yisakel, the ox shall be stoned. V'gam ba'alav yumat, and also the owner is guilty of a capital offence and is put to death because he did not look after his known to be goring ox. He was therefore vicariously responsible for something he should have been looking after. Now, you'll say to me, what's that got to do with a servant? Did this servant of Yanai kill somebody before? Is he a goring ox? Is he a manservant who has got what we would call in the parlance? Has he got form? Right? Has he done it before? The answer is
No.
No. Why is the answer no, Leslie?
It doesn't mention it there in the text, does it?
It doesn't mention it there in the text. You're right, but there's another reason why it can't be. It can't be yes. Go on, Julia. Unmute and tell us. No. Well, what's the story, Leslie?
Sorry, I can't unmute. Obviously, if he'd done it before, he would already have had his punishment and been put to death.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. He would have been done for the first offence. So it can't be that he's a habitually killing person. So why is he? Why does the Gemarah bring this particular pasuk about the habitually goring bull to tell us about this non-habitually goring servant?
Well, people aren't the same as animals. So if
People,
you
correct.
are,
And therefore,
well, and therefore, what a bull can get away with, a person can't.
very nicely put. In fact, you are 100% correct. The halacha about people is that they are automatically assumed from day one to be in this category of v'hu'ad bivalav, of being warned. Okay, they are automatically in the category of somebody who is warned that you're not allowed to kill, because a person knows that you're not allowed to kill. A person is not an animal, as Julia quite correctly said. The animal might not know any better, and it's up to the owner to look after that animal. But a human being, even that if technically that human being belongs, inverted commas, to a master, he knows that you're not allowed to kill. So he's automatically in the category of what we call hu'ad. He's already in the category of being warned. So when this slave of King Yanai killed somebody, he is automatically in the category of somebody who's done something which is a capital offense. And because in Jewish law, a slave belongs to his master in the same way as an ox belongs to his master, that master, because of this pasuk here, v'gam ba'alav yumat, and also its owner shall be put to death, the owner of the slave, in our case, King Yanai, is responsible for his actions and is also, therefore, needs to be tried. Because if it turns out that this person, this slave, did actually kill somebody, and all the conditions of Jewish law are met, i.e., there was a warning, there were 2 witnesses, and all the other things that we require for a capital offense, if those things are all met, then both the slave and the master, in our case, King Yanai, would need to be put to death. We know, don't we, that there's a Gemarah that tells us that a Bet Din, which put to death 1 man in 70 years, was considered a cruel Bet Din. So it wasn't a particularly common occurrence, but that's not to say that there weren't lots of trials. Okay, there may well be lots of trials, but there weren't many convictions because the conditions that had to be met were very stringent. In other words, the bar of beyond reasonable doubt was not good enough. Circumstantial evidence is no good. There is a famous Gemarah about, I'm not mistaken, it might actually be Shimon ben Shetach. Can't remember. A famous Gemarah about somebody who witnessed I think it was Shimon ben Shetach actually, who witnessed somebody being chased into a cave by somebody else, and somebody else was carrying a dagger. He arrived at the cave, and the victim was lying there dead. The other person was stood over him with a bloody dagger, and he said, no, we can't convict this person because there weren't witnesses, and that's how the halacha is. So circumstantial evidence is not good enough to put somebody to death in Jewish law, but that doesn't mean there aren't trials. And our case is about a trial. So now what's happened? Okay, can you still see my screen? I'm going to stop it and go back to the Gemarah now.
Yeah.
Let me reshare with you. It's a bit of a pain, this, but I'm not on my main computer because I'm on the laptop. So you'll just have to bear with me a sec while I reshare. On the other computer, I can just flip between screens. There we go, back on the Gemarah. So we've got a problem here, haven't we? Because Shimon ben Shetach is the Nasi, and therefore he is the chairman of the bench. He is the president of the Sanhedrin. But he is also the brother-in-law of King Yanai. So we got to bear that in mind. Let's go back to our story. Avdei de Yanai Malka Katal Nafsha. The servant of Yanai allegedly killed a person. Amalahu Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach said to the Chachamim, to the other members of the Sanhedrin, Tanu Einechem. What does that mean? Place Einechem. I'm stressing the chem. What does that mean?
Your eyes.
Your eyes. Why did he say that? Why did he not say our eyes?
I think because I read this yesterday, but isn't it because he reclused himself because he was a relation?
Yes, he was not allowed to. He was not allowed to give judgment. He was not allowed to be involved in this whole thing because he was a relative. He had what we call negiut. He had a vested interest. Not only that, they were pretty much arch enemies. So even if they hadn't been brother-in-law, it might have been a bit tricky, this, because how Yanai would be judged is difficult to imagine, because Yanai and the Bet Din were at loggerheads for most of the time. So it's difficult to understand how you could have anybody who could judge him, but certainly not Shimon ben Shetach, who's his brother-in-law. He has connections which would bar him from sitting on this case. And that's why he says to the other rabbis, Tanu einechem, place your eyes upon him. But then he says something else, doesn't he? Or ne du ne nu. What does that mean? Or ne du ne nu.
That we should judge.
We should judge. That's right.
Judge, yeah.
So that's a bit problematic.
To include himself there.
Yes, he's included himself there. And you'll see that, in fact, he did not do what he should have done, which was to step aside completely. Even though he may or may not have been judging, he got involved. He got involved, and he if you like, sets out his stall clearly and says that we should judge him, including himself, which sort of, in some ways, doesn't reflect well on Shimon ben Shetach in this story. But anyway, so
happens in English law today, though, doesn't it, Johnny?
Yes, you can't judge somebody if you have
connection.
Some kind of connection.
Couldn't it mean you should put your eyes on him, and rather than that we should judge him, it means the court should judge him, not you, but the court. So he's part of the court. I
agree, but then it would be tenu einenu. Let us put our eyes. I mean,
he's distinguishing it. So the first part is that you will be the actual physical people who make the judge, who are the judges, but the court makes the decision, and he is the head of the court.
You go now.
Okay, I'll buy that, Julia. I think that's a good explanation. I think it's a little kind, but you're a kind person, so we'll buy that. Okay, so when Shimon ben Shetach says we shall judge him, he doesn't mean we as in you and me. He means we as in the royal we, or the court we, meaning the court will judge him. Okay, fair enough. Let's move on. They sent for him, Shalechu le, here over here on the screen. Have you got the Gemara on the screen? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Shalchu le, they sent for him, and they said to him, Avdecha ketal nafsha, your slave killed a person. Okay, big deal. Shadrei lahu. Okay, Shadrei lahu. Yanai sent the slave to them. Says, okay, slave killed somebody, allegedly. He has to stand trial. Very good. Off you go. Shalchule, they sent back a message to Yanai the king. Oh no, that's not what we meant. Ta ant nami lahacha. You also, ta. You can see what ta comes from. Comes from ata, right? You. Ant nami means also lahacha. You also have to come to here. In other words, to the court. V'hu ad bivalav. And that's our pasuk that we just quoted before. And the owner is warned. Amra Torah, the Torah says, Yavo Baal Hashor v'ya'amod al shoro. The Torah says that the owner of the ox has to come and stand by his ox. And they are both tried, as it were. And so they say to Yanai, he has to come. What do you think Yanai did without looking on? Julia, what do you think? Or have you read on?
I haven't read on, but I read the article that you sent a couple of weeks ago. And
Because he told them where to get off.
Okay, Yanai, Johnny says Yanai told them where to get off. What do you think,
yes.
Leslie? What do you think Yanai did?
I agree with Johnny. I think he would have told him to get lost.
Okay, Julia, what do you think?
Well, my understanding is that he behaved like my 15-year-old grandson. He was rebellious. He said, okay. Okay,
So
but I'm not playing your game.
Okay, well, you're both right and you're both wrong, because he didn't initially tell him where to get off. He actually did show up. Let's go on.
Huh.
Okay. Ata vayetev. He turned up to the court. Vayetev. What does the word vayetev mean? Bearing in mind that a taf and a shin can be interchangeable.
Sat down.
Sat down. That's right. He came along and he sat down. So, has anybody seen the TV series Happy Valley? BBC TV series Happy Valley. David, you're nodding. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous series. Recommend it to anybody who's got some time on your hands and you want to be to watch a very good series. I very rarely watch TV, but this was a very good series that was recommended. It's taken me years to watch it, but I watched on the plane coming back on Sunday. I watched an episode in which we had a court case which absolutely mirrored this Gemarah. It's amazing how often life mirrors the Gemarah, because this chap who was the villain of the whole piece was in court for a particular offence, a murder, as it happens, and the TV program showed the beginning of the trial, and as you know, when the judge comes in, he was all there with his shaitel and his kapota there, his red kapota and his shaitel. He walks in, and the clerk says, what does the clerk say when the judge comes in?
Be upstanding.
All rise.
All right, yeah.
Okay, and of course everybody stood up in the gallery and at the advocate's bench and all that stuff, except for the prisoner, who sat there, refused to stand up with a dirty great smirk on his face. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen the series, and I won't tell you what happens next. But he absolutely refused to stand up. And this was Yanai HaMelech. It was amazing. I was watching this thing on the plane on Sunday, and I'm thinking, wow, we've done this. We've done this in Sanhedrin. So Yanai came and he sat down. Amalei Shimon ben Shetach. Now imagine, okay, let's go out of here so you can't read on. Now then, he's refusing to stand up. He sits down there like your 15-year-old grandson, rebellious, and like this chap in the Happy Valley program, with a face on that says, "I am not standing up. I'm sitting down." Shimon ben Shetach comes along, and what do you think he's going to say to the king?
Show respect.
Show respect. Stand up. Yes, Leslie, have you got an idea what you think he would say?
No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, stand up. What should he have said?
Your Majesty, be uprising.
Okay, yeah, he should have shown respect for the king.
Yeah.
Granted, yes, that's a possibility. David Marks, what do you think he should have said?
Have respect for the court.
Exactly. No one is. What's the word I'm looking for?
No one is above the law.
Everybody is equal. No one is above the law. Everyone's equal in the sight of the law.
Okay, I think he should have said absolutely nothing, because he's brother-in-law. He's barred from saying anything, in my view. I think he was just winding it. He got wound up. Yanai deliberately sat there to wind him up, and he got wound up. And I think that he should have said nothing. And you will see from what happened that had he said nothing, things might have been a little better than they actually were. Let's go on in the story. Amalei Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach says, Yanai Hamelech. So he does say, Your Majesty the King. So good for him. He gives him respect. He says, Yanai Hamelech. King Yanai, Your Majesty Yanai. Amod al raglecha ve'ya'idu becha. Stand on your feet, and there will be testimony against you. Now, next question. Why does he have to stand up? Where do we learn in the Torah that a person who is accused of a misdemeanor has to stand before the court? It is a Torah law. Where do we learn it from? David's nodding. Tell us, David.
Well, it's in the next line of the Gemarah in the Parshas Shoftim, I think.
Okay, you read on. Very good. Parashat Shoftim. You knew it anyway, I'm sure. Parashat Shoftim. Let me see if I can show it you on the screen. There we go. Hang on. Bit of a nuisance, this, but we'll get there in a minute. Wait. There we are. Okay, so the Parashat Shoftim in the book of Devarim says that if there is a court case, va'amdu shnei ha'anashim asher lahem hariv lifnei Hashem, the men between whom there is a disagreement, riv is a disagreement. Amdu, what does that mean? Stand. Va'amdu, and they shall stand. But who are they standing before?
Hashem, actually, when we think about it.
Lifnei Hashem. They are standing before Hashem. Lifnei HaKohanim, before the priests. V'hashoftim, and before the judges. Asher yihyu bayamim haheim, who will be the judges who will be in those days. Okay, so they have to stand. It is a halacha from the Torah that the people about whom the court case revolves, around whom it revolves, have to stand up before Hashem, before the Kohanim, before the Shoftim. So it's not just an issue that Shimon ben Shetach is saying, have some respect for the court. Let's go back to the Gemarah now, and you'll see what Shimon ben Shetach actually fully says. There's the Gemarah back on the screen.
Yeah.
He says, Yanai HaMelech, Amod al raglecha, stand on your feet, v'yayidu b'cha, and people will give testimony against you. V'lo lefanenu ata omeid, and it is not before us that you are standing, or brackets, it is not just us before whom you are standing. Ela lifnei mi sha'amar v'haya ha'olam ata omeid. Ela, rather, ata omeid, you are standing, lifnei, before me, the one who, sha'amar, said, v'haya ha'olam, the world shall be. In other words, the creator of the world. It's a long-winded way of telling him that he's standing before Hashem. And Shene'emar, and the Gemarah quotes the pasuk that we just looked at together. Va'amdu shnei ha'anashim asher lahem hariv v'go. What does that mean there? V'go. Etc. Yes. What's the full word? Because that's got a little chubchik on it, hasn't it? Which means that's a shortened version. What's the full word there?
Gomer.
Yes, well done, Johnny. Gomer, which means
completed.
to finish, to complete. So another example of how the Gemarah expects the reader to know the whole Torah off by heart. And just by quoting the beginning of that pasuk, we haven't even got the important part of the pasuk. The important part of the pasuk is Lifnei Hashem, which comes at the end of which comes next. So the Gemarah expects us to know the whole of the Torah. And you know my views on that we shouldn't be learning Gemarah, and we can't learn Gemarah properly until we know the Torah and Tanakh properly. But anyway, we'll not get onto that particular soapbox right now. You've heard it from me many times before. So the Gemarah quotes our pasuk and says, Shimon ben Shetach reminds Yanai HaMelech that it's not me, it's not my own kavod that I'm worried about, Your Majesty, but you should know that it is before Hashem that you are standing. Now, Yanai is definitely now behaving like Julia's 15-year-old rebellious grandson, because he's not having it at all. Amar lo, he said to him, who said to who?
Yanai said to Shetach.
Yes, Yanai said to his brother-in-law, Shimon ben Shetach, Lo kisheta'omar ata, I will not stand up when you tell me to stand up. So in other words, you can get lost. I'm not listening to you. Ella, kama shoyomru chaverecha. If your friends, i.e. the whole court, tells me to stand, I'll stand. Okay? And that is clearly a personal dig at Shimon ben Shetach. Now, in case you had any doubt about what Shimon ben Shetach should have said when I asked you what he was going to say, and I said he should have said absolutely nothing, this is the proof. Because this is now turned personal. If it wasn't personal between Shimon ben Shetach and Yanai, it is certainly personal between Yanai and Shimon ben Shetach. He has made that very clear. He said, not interested in what you've got to say, but I will listen if the rest of the court tells me to stand up. Now, before we go on, those that haven't read on, what do you think happened next? Remember that? A question of sport. Yeah, you used to have that program. They'd stop it and they'd say, "What happened next?" It was, I used to love that bit. Never got it right, mind. Anyway, what happened next, folk? What do you think happened next?
The court told him to stand up.
Okay, Leslie says the court told him to stand up. Johnny, what do you think happened next?
Yeah, correct. That sounds right.
Sounds right. Okay, the courts told him to stand up. Julia?
Sorry, after all that, and you've waited for me, it sounds too obvious to be correct. So I'm doubtful that that's correct.
All right, Julia is adopting the stance that I wouldn't have asked that question if it was so obvious. Obviously, you know my style by now. I think that's a fair answer. David, have you read on?
No.
What do you think happened next?
You have to turn the page in my Gemarah, and I haven't. I probably agree with Julia that he doesn't do as he's told.
Okay, let's have a look. Let's have a look. Nifne leyamino. Shimon ben Shetach turned to his right. Right, he's got, and this is where I think Julia's original comments about Shimon ben Shetach not judging himself are wrong, because he is clearly, from this next piece of Gemarah, sat in the middle of the judges. He's got judges to his right and judges to his left. He turns to his right. Nifne le yamino. He turns to his right, to the judges on his right-hand side, as if to say, no, tell him he's got to stand up. And what did they do? Kavshu pneihem bekarka. The judges looked, they forced their faces to the ground. In other words, they did not stand up and be counted, if you pardon the pun. They did not do what he asked. They looked down, avoided Shimon ben Shetach's gaze, avoided Yanai's gaze. They, in modern parlance, bottled it. Right? They bottled it. They did not do what they should have done, which was to say, yes, Your Majesty, you have to stand up. And why not? Why didn't they do that?
I'm assuming they were frightened because he was king.
They were scared. They were scared. Yanai was not a particularly nice character. And he had a reputation for being violent. They did not want to wind up the king and be subject to his anger. So they said nothing. Nifne lismolo. He turned to his left-hand side, did Shimon ben Shetach, and said, well, what about you lot then? They did the same thing. They looked down and they did not support Shimon ben Shetach. And in fact, despite the fact that Shimon ben Shetach should have said nothing because he was what we call nogea bedavar, he was literally touched by the matter. He had a vested interest. Although he should have said nothing, he was correct in the fact that the king did need to stand up. So they did not support him. They did not follow protocol. They did not follow the halacha, these judges. And Shimon ben Shetach was not impressed. Amar lahen, he said to them, yes, Julia?
I'm trying to think, and I hope I get this right, but are there 71 of them? Or is it 23?
There would be 23 because they are not trying the king for murder. They're trying his slave for murder. And so it's a regular capital offense, not a king capital offense. It's a good question, though. And it may be that it was the full Sanhedrin, because ultimately it could have resulted in the king being executed, which would take a 71 Sanhedrin. So I don't know is the answer.
Well, I was only asking because it just seems odd that not one of them, out of quite a large number, would be willing, which we usually find that there's always somebody, but we're willing to stand up and be counted.
Okay, it's called peer pressure. It's called compensation bias. It's called keeping your head down. It's called all of those things. But it's a good question you raised. Was it 23 or 71? If they were just trying the slave, it was 23. You could argue it was 71 because it might have ended up with Yanai being executed, which it didn't, but it might have done. Don't know. Good question. I'll try and find out.
Well, what difference would it make, though?
None. It's just an interesting question.
Okay.
Just a fascinating question. Except it makes a difference on Julia's point that if it was 71, you'd have thought that somebody might have, had the bottle to stand up and be counted. So Shimon ben Shetach, of course, is now really cross. He's cross with everybody. He's cross with Yanai because he hasn't stood up. And now he's cross with his colleagues for not standing up for what is the correct halacha. So he says to them, Ba'alei machshavot atem. You are masters of thought, meaning, and Rabbi Steinsaltz puts it beautifully, enjoying your private thoughts and not speaking. So when you have a machshava, it's a thought. It's a thought process. We say there is a saying, I'm not sure where it comes from. Maybe David knows where it comes from. Machshava k'ma'aseh. If I were to ask one of you to do me a favor, I don't know, let's say I ask you, could you go to the shops and get me a bottle of water? And one of you say, yeah, I'll go. I'll just get my coat and I'll go. And then I find a bottle of water and I call you up and I say, you don't need to bother. I found a bottle of water. I don't need it now. I would say to you, machshava k'ma'aseh, your thought process, meaning that your willingness to do the mitzvah for me, k'ma'aseh. It's as if it's like ma'aseh, an action. So you will get the reward, as it were, as if you had done the action, even though you didn't do it, but you had the machshava, you had the thought to do it, you agreed to do it, you wanted to do it, you were going to do it, your thought processes was to do it, only the reason you didn't do it was because I stopped you because I didn't need it anymore. Okay? That's called machshava k'ma'aseh. Whatever the reward would be that you would get, not from me, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you would get that reward, and it's called machshava k'ma'aseh. So machshava, in a way, it's almost like not the opposite of an action, but it's I can't really explain what I'm trying to say. Machshava is something which is not an action. Let's put it that way. A thought is not an action. And he's criticizing here. Shimon ben Shetach is criticizing. And he's saying,
intention. No?
Intention, that's the word. Intention. Thank you. Your intention is like your action. So he's saying here, you are masters of your thoughts. You're keeping your thoughts to yourself. But I know what your intention was. And so does HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he gives them a bit of a curse, actually. He says to them, Yavo Baal Machshavot v'yipara mikem. May the master, Baal Machshavot, the master of thoughts, i.e., the one who knows what your thoughts were, the one who knows what your intentions were. It's the opposite of what I just said. I said, Machshava k'ma'aseh, in a positive way. Your intention was to do a mitzvah, you get the reward. Here, he's saying your intention was to do something wrong. Not to tell him to stand up. Baal Machshavot, the master of thoughts. Who's the master of thoughts? Kadosh Baruch Hu. Yipara mikem, should exact punishment from you. He curses them. He curses them that Hashem should punish them. And look what happened. Miyad, immediately. Ba Gavriel. Gavriel came. Which Gavriel?
Angel.
Who was Gavriel?
So the angel.
The angel Gavriel. Yeah. V'chavatan bekarka. And he struck them, these judges, to the ground. V'metu. And they died. The whole Sanhedrin there died. What a disaster. And why? Why was that a disaster? Why did that disaster come about? Came about because of personal animosity. Personal animosity between Shimon ben Shetach and Yanai HaMelech, which is why I said, I had the benefit of having read on, why I said when I asked you what he should have said absolutely nout. Should have kept his mouth shut and said nothing. And he certainly should not have cursed the judges. And why did he curse the judges? Because he got riled up. He got riled up by Yanai, who sat there like the Happy Valley fellow with a dirty, great smirk on his face, saying, I am not standing up because I do not hold your word, Shimon ben Shetach, of any importance. If your mates tell me, if your judges tell me, then I'll stand up. But you, no way. And so then he was personally riled up. He turns to his judges and says, come on, boys, support me. And they don't support him. They're frightened. They look down at their feet and they bite their fingernails and twiddle their thumbs and suddenly find that they've got something to write on a pad and avoid eye gaze. And he then is so riled up that he does something which is not an appropriate thing to do for a Nasi Bet Din, and he curses his fellow judges. And the disaster comes from this. So, but Oto Sha'ah, back into the Gemara, at that time, Amru, they said, the rabbis said, Melech lo dan, velo danin oto, velo me'id, velo me'idin oto. A king of Israel. We can't have him coming to the to be judged or giving evidence. It's too dangerous. And so we make a halacha that this is not going to, we can't ever have this again. Seems to me that's the wrong gezerah that they made. What they should have made was that anybody who has got a vested interest should completely distance themselves from the case, and then this wouldn't have happened. So I don't think...
Who's they, Johnny? Was that, if there were 23 in this Sanhedrin, was it?
Yeah, I guess that the new Sanhedrin,
the other ones from this...
Yeah, whoever was left, or maybe the new ones that they appointed immediately. Good question who they were. The sages said, I don't know which ones. But it seems to me that this whole piece of Gemarah, whilst it is an explanation of the question we asked, right at the beginning of the Gemarah was reason why we king of Israel. Seems to me that this whole story does not cover anybody in glory. It certainly does not cover the legal process in glory, doesn't cover Shimon ben Shetach in glory, doesn't cover Yanai HaMelech in glory, and I don't think it covers the whole process of the decree that they made in glory. I don't think they made the right decree. So it's an interesting piece of Gemarah. We're coming up to Tisha B'Av. We're coming up to the season of sinat chinam, personal animosity for no reason. Not saying Yanai HaMelech and Shimon ben Shetach didn't have a reason, but there was certainly personal animosity. A personal feud here has led to disaster in Israel. We need to learn those lessons. This Gemarah is very timely. I didn't plan it that way. It just happened that this particular Gemarah is what we've learned in the week of Tisha B'Av. So we should all take on those lessons. Any questions on today's very interesting Gemarah?
Yeah, it's interesting that Shimon ben Shetach, he does not get killed. And yet, really, at the end of the day, he was the one who should have actually not taken part in this whole process. And if he would have been correct in doing what he would have done, then possibly the rest would not have happened, and the rest of the Beth Din would not have been killed.
I agree entirely. You'll all be familiar with the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. It's the same thing there, isn't it? The rabbis remained silent when Bar Kamsa was flung out of the party. You'll know the story, yeah? So when he was flung out of the party and embarrassed in front of everybody, he says to himself, well, the rabbis remained silent, so they must have agreed. And so I'm going to get the rabbis back for this. And the Gemara tells us in Gittin 55b, if you want to look it up, it's one of the few things you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. As a result of that, says the Gemara, ultimately the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of a chain of events that was set off. And you're right, Leslie, had Shimon ben Shetach behaved in an appropriate manner, or had he not behaved in an inappropriate manner, this whole thing may not have happened. So it's a strident lesson for us all to make sure that our personal feuds do not spill over. First of all, we shouldn't have them, and if we do, they shouldn't spill over into anything else.
It's not necessarily the case, though, that he said that because of his personal feud. He would have said that to anybody who didn't show respect to the court. Also, the thing is that there were 20 or odd judges. They must have been very scared. Ab initio, they must have been scared from the start, because they knew that they were going to try the king. And who would want to do that? I mean, they weren't onto a winner, whatever they did.
Okay, let's take those 2 points. The first point is you're trying to defend Shimon ben Shetach again. Good for you. Well done. It's nice that you are always thinking the good of people. But if he'd have thought it through, even if his motives were pure, he should have realized that the fact that he is going to tell Yanai to stand up is going to wind up Yanai. And it did. If he'd have thought on and said, look, I can't do this, if he'd had a quick shushki in one of the judge's ears, the vice president's ears, if he'd have said, look, I'm out of here, I've got nigiyut, I can't get involved, I'm too involved here, but you need to know he needs to stand up, none of that would have happened.
Maybe the judges had already said, because he was a Nasi, maybe the judges had, prior to any of this, said, we don't want to be in on this. And he was doing his best to see that there could be a proper trial. After all, this slave had killed somebody.
Yes.
We don't know the historical.
We don't know. We have to accept that if this story happened as the Gemara says, and it was a literal story that these people died, there must have been a reason for it. Kadosh Baruch Hu was not going to go and kill him just for nothing. Not speaking up is not a capital offense. So, we don't know the whole picture, as you say. It may well be that there was, there's other things that we don't know. We can only work on what is on the face of it in the story, and we can learn something from it. And I think that that's important. If we can learn something from it, we should. And now's a good time to think about not having any personal feuds. And if we do have them, try and limit them.
On the paragraph of Halakha, Rabbi Steinsaltz says that all the kings of that time were known to be disobedient to the courts.
Yes, yes, because the whole kingdom had split, hadn't it, really? So they weren't really loyal to the Pharisaic based in.
Yeah, but kings in plural, it says, not
Well,
not just this story.
If you learn Malachim, which we will eventually once we've finished Shmuel Bet, which we haven't yet started, but might well start next week, then we will we'll see that it was not the kings of Israel and the kings of Yehuda after Shlomo Melech did not always cover themselves in glory, and that is an understatement. Right, I shall love you and leave you. Shavua tov, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy your shopping.
Thank you very much.